Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to Mormon Sex Info. This is Natasha Helfer Parker, and today I have, she's a lifelong professional photographer and storyteller with photography, and we are here today to talk about intersex and transgender issues. There's been a lot of stuff in the news, and I think it's just a good topic to get more understanding on. And I'd like to have you introduce yourself further and maybe explain why I'm having you on to talk about these things.
Thanks, Natasha. You're having me on because I'm freaking awesome. That's why you're having me on.
You are freaking awesome.
Well, so you're gonna learn a lot about me and my twisted sense of humor, and I'm very witty and wry and sarcastic and a bit of a smart aleck. And I may swear from time to time, which I hope doesn't turn off your audience or alienate them. But I come by it honestly because I grew up on a horse farm.
I try to let people just kind of have their own license of how they want to portray themselves on the show. Yes.
If you accept me authentically, then you accept my four-letter words. You're having me on the show, well, probably for a myriad of reasons, but really we kind of met a couple of years ago at Sunstone. We were part of a panel where participants were discussing intersex and transgender issues. We've kind of crossed paths at least one other Sunstone, and then we reconnected in a kind of a fun way down in Tucson this past spring when I was down there doing some work on a couple different things. Well, I presented at Sunstone in Mesa, and we didn't meet at Tucson, we met in Mesa, that's right. I get Mesa, Tucson, and Phoenix, and there's like all those towns down there that I don't even know where they end and where they begin, so...
That general area.
The area, right. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm also, probably one of the reasons you're having me on is I've learned a ton of stuff and interviewed many, many women and their children. I've gotten to know many of these transgender children and many of these transgender mama dragons. And actually that's not accurate to call them a transgender mama dragon. It's more accurate to call them a mama dragon, mother of a transgender child. Anyway, I've met many of these women, I've met many of their children, I've seen many of their real-life experiences, and have come to love them dearly. They have a very soft spot in my heart.
Yeah, so that, and can you talk just slightly, I mean, this podcast isn't necessarily about your project, but can you tell us a little bit about the book you just came out with?
So the book is called The Mama Dragon Story Project, and I describe it as a suicide prevention effort. And that really is what it is. We're trying to keep these kids, LGBT plus kids, alive until they're able to strike out on their own, usually, college age, and they can leave and they can create and start their own life once they're out of the home and as a young adult. How can we keep them alive from those formative years where they identify themselves who they are, either their gender identity or their sexual preference or sexual orientation? How do we create an environment of acceptance and love in the home so that they're not suicidal and they don't feel like running away? And we've learned that suicide and homelessness are rampant in the LDS, LGBT community. So one of the ways that I have decided to reach the mother and change the attitude in the home is by the sharing of these essays from these mothers and showing their portraits so that the mother in crisis mode or who is desperately looking for examples of how to navigate this unique, extremely unique journey within Mormonism, has a resource, manual or resource guide that they can turn to and go, oh, here's 20 women, here's 80 women that I can pick and choose and identify with this lady, and if they did it, by gum, I can do it too. That's the way I've described it for the past year, and so it rattles off my tongue really easy, and it might sound like platitudes, and it might sound like oh yeah, it sounds so easy to do this, but trust me, I've met with those women who are struggling mightily, and I get to the core of who I am. I understand how difficult it is navigate this challenge.
Yeah, so you're taking photographs of these mothers and then putting them into this beautiful book that you've put together, and then next to the photograph is a, I guess, excerpt that the mother has come up with as far as explaining some of her experience.
Right. Each mother has written a 1,000-word essay, and then I've pared it down to about 525 words. And and then I have a preface. I have an introductory 3-page essay that's quite pointed, kind of laying it out. Look, Mom, this is what's going on, and if you're not on board, then there are bad things that could happen to your child and your relationship with your child. So yeah, it's pictures of these women to put a face to these words from these women to hopefully reach out and touch these moms and other allies that are trying to figure out how this is going to work. It's been amazing. I've been doing this for the past, a little over a year, and it is the most rewarding photography project I've ever done. And I've been doing this for 27 years.
Yeah.
So this is probably what I will go down in history for as far as my legacy left behind of my work.
Well, and it's an incredible legacy, and I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful resource that you're providing, and so many of the women involved in it are just amazing people. It's just
they're the best. They're the best.
An honor to have gotten to know you and many of them through that project, for sure. Okay, so I want to organize the podcast then kind of in two different directions. One is I would really like to look at this word intersex. Oftentimes when we talk about LGBT populations, people might notice that the acronym starts getting longer. So there's LGBTQ, which stands for queer, and then I, which stands for intersex, and then now there's even A for asexual. So there's more and more terms as we're starting to get more comfortable talking about all the different spectrums of sexuality and gender and all of that. So today I'd really like to spend some time on intersex and your understanding of that, and also transgender and your understanding of that. Now, I know you come to this from a personal perspective, and I don't know if you're comfortable sharing some of that, and then that can get us going on the information that could be really useful for people to have.
Sure, perfect. Where do you want to start?
Are you comfortable sharing how you come to know a lot of this information yourself?
Well, sure. I am a late transitioning woman. It's extremely difficult to talk about my story openly because I don't want my story to overshadow the tremendously important work that I feel I'm doing with the Mama Dragon Story Project. And every time I speak about my story, it seems to kind of shift the spotlight. But, since we're here, let's just run with it. And I won't get into my personal story in detail because it just invites a gazillion questions. But generally speaking, I'm comfortable talking. You can hear the hesitation and the reticence in my voice, but only because this journey is so incredibly personal. I will just say this, that my journey has taken me into the depths of understanding of the intersex community, intersex medical situation, the various developmental disorders that happen in utero, and what happens to these infants after they've been born, surgical interventions, unnecessary surgical interventions, lifelong health problems, late transitioning intersex individuals. And then that kind of blends into what I've learned about individuals who have decided to change their gender presentation, or their gender identity later on in life. The project has taught me a lot. My life has taught me a lot. They really are blending together, and it's safe to say that as far as my expertise in this arena, the only thing that I'm an expert in is my own lived experience. And I think that if you talked to any transgender individual, if you spoke to any intersex individual, and if you spoke to any LGBTQ and the other letters, if you spoke to them, they would say very plainly that I am not an expert in everyone's experience. I'm not a spokesman for any letter as a community. I am a spokesman for me. And so first and foremost, that's really where I come from, is I can only speak to my experience, what happened to me, and then I use my foundational life as a way to give advice, suggestions, possibly warnings, cautionary tales to these parents and to their children who are going through a very similar thing. So I come at this with a PhD level education and understanding of one thing and one thing only, and that is my own life.
Sure.
I can share things from other people's lives. Certainly, you understand confidentiality as a therapist, and this project has taught me, first and foremost, the protection of the child, the protection of the mother is paramount. So I will share, stories and anecdotes, and I might share them openly as they relate to me. I may share them anonymously as they relate to mothers or children that I've met and spoken with at length, have lived in their homes at length, have visited with them multiple times over the past year. So it's important, I think, for the listener to understand that I may be talking about several different types of scenarios. It doesn't necessarily mean that they all relate to me as an individual.
Okay.
That's a really long, drawn out, tedious disclaimer, but I feel like I have to say that because that's truly where I come from.
And I appreciate you doing that because I want to make sure you're as comfortable as possible as well as we discuss these issues. So let's start with some of that definition piece. I think there's a lot more information than ever before on LGBT issues that people can have access to, not so much on intersex and transgender. This is kind of...
Yeah, and I will just interject real quick. I'm learning through actually my dear friend Marian Edmonds-Allen that the B is even more marginalized, more stigmatized, or less understood than even the T. The bisexual community is less understood and more marginalized than the transgender community. I did not know that until I spoke with her last night.
Thank you. Yes, I agree, and that's a whole nother podcast I need to have, is the bisexual.
Yeah.
For sure. So can you start with just giving us a definition, a general definition of what intersex means and how that tends to show up in a variety of different situations for people?
Well, the term intersex is a replacement, a more politically correct replacement for an older term that was used from the Greeks on up, and that's called hermaphrodism or pseudo-hermaphrodism, which is an extremely rare condition in actuality in the physical manifestation of these children, where that they have both functioning anatomical external sexual organs or genitalia. That type of intersex condition is extremely rare and hardly ever manifests itself physically.
External meaning there would be a penis present and a vagina present.
Or some form of a penis and some form of vagina, right. Extremely, extremely rare. But I think that most people, when they hear the term intersex, or when they hear the term hermaphrodite, that's immediately what they think of is, oh, this person has this amazing fusion of male and female that we can see and we can gawk at and we can ask questions about and we can pay a nickel at the circus to go and walk through the tent and see. That's really one of the reasons why I think the medical community and the individual community, the intersex individual, has shifted away from the term hermaphrodism with its sideshow connotation and moved into this term of intersex. The medical community is also wrestling with this new term, a clinical diagnosis called DSD. DSD is short for disorders of sexual development. The intersex community has a problem with this disorders of sexual development moniker, mainly because they don't think of themselves as disordered. And that's an interesting thing to think about, that an individual can claim their own wholeness, perfection, or their own individual damage or imperfection. And here's a good way to think about this. When I was teaching at UVU and at the Art Institute, I've had 3 deaf students in my class. And I used the word hearing impaired because I thought that was what I was supposed to use. And in every instance, they're like, no, don't call me that. I'm deaf. Hearing impaired insinuates that there's something wrong with me. I don't think there's anything wrong with me. They've claimed back this term deaf. And they look at themselves as whole. Many of these deaf students have told me that they would not want to be hearing because of the things that they know, they understand in a different way because they're deaf. So the individual that's an intersex falls within this broad spectrum of intersex conditions. That individual may look at their own life or their own self and say, you know what? This is how I was born. I'm not disordered. These aren't problems that happened to me. It's just the way that I came. In the same way that someone might say, well, you have red hair. Are you challenged because of your hair color? No. I think that the disorders of sexual development really only falls into play in a legitimate way when there are health risks present at birth, when there is a medically required intervention to increase the viability of the child or the infant. And there are many intersex conditions that do require immediate medical attention.
Can you talk about that a little bit? So, in other words, what are some of the scenarios that parents of an infant might be faced with right from the get-go?
There's actually a really good wiki page that's titled Disorders of Sex Development. And there are 31 individual conditions that are listed. Some of them are life-threatening. Some of them aren't even diagnosed until puberty. Some of them aren't diagnosed until late into adult life. So let's just say, for example...
So meaning, let me just clarify really quickly, meaning somebody could be intersex and not even know about it.
Absolutely. And that happens
all the time.
That happens all the time. And when I use the phrase all the time, let's get real, it doesn't happen all the time. It's common enough that you wouldn't be surprised if somebody you knew... Oh, let me back up. How can I say that? You wouldn't be surprised? No, you might be surprised that you would know somebody who is intersex. You didn't know it, and they didn't know it. It's that common. Some form of external or internal anatomic difference is present in 1 in every 1,500 live births. That's a lot. Some of them require surgical intervention. Some of them require medical intervention as far as doses of certain drugs, some replacement hormone therapy. Out of 31 conditions, I can't know every single scenario, certainly. I don't know of any single doctor that would know every single scenario completely. I don't even know an endocrinologist that would know them all completely. It's really quite amazing when you look at these and you read through them. And I would recommend anyone that's curious to know more, the wiki page is really quite good. There's also a group called the Intersex Society of North America. And they had an organization and a website that was very good and it was very well maintained up until about 3 years ago. And then that group disbanded over political infighting amongst the leaders, and they reformed under a different moniker, and their charter, their mission is really quite different than the original ISNA website was. That original isna.org website is still up, and it lists a lot of good information, but the organization is now defunct. And it talks about that on their website. I would not hesitate to send someone to that website as well. Intersex conditions are actually quite interesting because some of them are very close to each other in terms of chromosomal development issues, as well as external genitalia and internal structures. Some of these intersex conditions masquerade as others. Some of them are present alongside another one. Some of them are, they're really sneaky. They're and I'm not an MD. I have 2 degrees. I've got a bachelor's and I've got a master's, and none of them are in medicine. They're only in photography. So I come to this from a non-clinical, perspective. This is just what I've learned through digging and looking and questioning and all those things. So as far as asking me, expert, this goes back to my whole long, lengthy disclaimer. But honestly, if you want to know a lot about intersex conditions, dig on the internet. Look at this wiki page. Look at the ISNA page. There, Google all these different things. And you may look at these and you may say, either within yourself or with someone that you're going to go, oh, well, that's really interesting. Or no, that's not it. Or, you kind of can look through this and go, oh, these are the tomatoes I like, or these are the avocados I like, or these ones I don't like. You get to kind of look and choose and say, this makes sense to me or this doesn't make sense to me. And not every individual that looks at this website is going to go, I'm intersex. They're going to go, this is a good information. Intersex conditions are very underrepresented. The intersex community is the only letter in the rainbow of letters, the LGBTQIA+. There's a lot of pluses. The intersex community is interesting in that they are the only letter which has a medical diagnosis that can be pinned on a map. For example, if you have Klinefelter syndrome, which means you have your 47th chromosome is made of XXY. And that's 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 men. That's a condition that you can look at the chromosome and say, boom, I can identify it. Mild androgen insensitivity syndrome, or known as MAIS, there's also AIS. Those are things that you can look at because you can measure the lack of androgens that are produced by the testes. So you can say, here's a condition that we can identify, and this is the cause of this condition. You can't do that with any of the other letters. ... Yet. Period.
Right.
That's my opinion. Now, from what I've learned from intersex conditions and the transgender lived experience, in my opinion, it's only a matter of time, and that day is rapidly approaching, by the way, in my opinion again, that medical science is going to look at all these different transgender individuals and they're going to go, wow, we didn't know that your brain more closely aligned with the physical structure of the gender that you identify as. Lots of studies are coming out recently within the past 2 or 3 years even, or even within the past year. There's been a research that's come out of the Netherlands. There was a new report I read just yesterday, as a matter of fact, that talked about the structure, the neural patterns of the transgender individual more closely aligned with that of the gender that they align with or they identify with. So I see this intersex umbrella, as broad as it is right now, getting bigger, getting really big, and encompassing all shades of transgender. And it might even come to the conclusion, science may come to a conclusion someday, that all variants of gender expression, gender identity, come under this rainbow. And the rainbow is such an interesting metaphor because as a photographer, I learn about color, and I go through color theory and color practice and color correction and all these things. And when we talk about the color red, there's no specific definition for the color red. There's Ferrari red, there's Coca-Cola red, there's McDonald's red, there's Target red. Every company that uses the color red is trademarked a specific color of red, but to the customer, to the general public, they all just call them red. In the same way, and this is a really wild metaphor, and I'm rambling, but if you were ever in one of my classes, you would know, oh, this is the way she teaches, blah, blah, blah. You will see that the continuum of gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation is very blended. It's very much like a watercolor painting. It's less and less like a black and white cartoon. It's one individual can experience 3 or 4 different types of experience of gender identity or sexual orientation within the same individual. And even within that individual, they can change rapidly day to day or within the same day, minute to minute. And I think people outside the community look at those individuals and they go, well, they're just confused. Well, they make up their mind. Oh, they're just lazy. They're just young. They don't know what they're talking about. But in speaking to the individual, getting to know them, their lives are very complex. Their lived experience is so nuanced and it's almost undefinable. We're moving into a language that goes beyond language. There are things that you experience that you cannot describe because we don't have words to describe them. And to the Mormon audience, that concept is very familiar. There are things that we don't have language for. I believe that's talked about in 3rd Nephi when the Savior visits the individuals on the North American continent. When he prayed, there's language that he used that cannot be written down. And I think there are emotions, there are events in our lives that are so unique to who we are that there are not words in any language to describe what has happened to us. That's a really long answer to a really short question.
Sure. Yeah, and I want to be clear that I'm not expecting you necessarily to be a clinician, obviously, because you're not.
No, not yet.
But I have a lot of confidence in your knowledge because I've spoken with you at length about your knowledge. And like you said, when this hits close to home, you get pretty adamant about having knowledge. And so,
Right.
so I think that you have a lot to offer in that regard. I may have clinicians in the future come on as well to talk about the more medical aspects, but you know your stuff. And so going back to my question then, it seems like there's the scenario where a baby is born and the classic, it's a boy, it's a girl, is not super clear, right? There's that scenario.
There's that scenario, and that happens a lot. And I think what it ends up being is there's a thing in popular culture now where we want to decorate a room. We want to buy clothes. We want to pick a name. We want to plan for this child that's entering our life. And as the parent of 2 beautiful children, I understand and I get that completely. We want to know what's coming next. And I think as a parent, we look at those early ultrasounds. We go down through the baby book and we pick out a column of names or a list of names from the boy column. We pick out a list of names from the girl column. And we look at those ultrasounds and we start picking colors and we start thinking about bedding and clothes and shoes and our day-to-day lived experience is extremely binary, and that word binary rolls off people's tongues that are in the community or affiliated with the community very easily. Binary. What does that mean, binary? To the person that's not in the community, the binary is one or the other, 0 or 1. If you are a 0, you cannot be a 1. If you are a 1, you cannot be a 0. And so in the gender binary, that manifests itself as boy or girl, male or female. When that individual enters the world that is not fully male, that is not fully female, that poses a tremendous social problem. The doctor, the parents, they have to make a decision. What are we going to do? And, people are expected to come home from the hospital or make a phone call or post on Instagram or make a post on Facebook saying, little Tommy was born at 7:59 a.m., a bouncing baby boy, he's perfect, he's got 10 fingers, he's got 10 toes, and we're looking forward to bringing him home and planting him in his baby blue bedroom with his Tonka toys and his dinosaurs and his police cars and his football, for example. That scenario is not that uncommon. People want that. People want that to happen to them. in the same way they want little Jane to come home and throw on the tulle and the ballet slippers and the pink and the My Little Pony and the Cinderella and the Disney princesses and that whole thing. That's great if your child fits those two roles or fits those two slots of gender clearly. When this individual comes into the world not conforming physically, the parents are forced to make a decision. And it hasn't been too recently that the parents have really been allowed to be part of that decision-making process. In the not too distant past, doctors aboard a panel of physicians at a hospital would take into account several factors, and it would vary widely depending on the hospital. What are we going to do? Is it easier to make this girl a boy? Is it easier to make this boy a girl? And they would do those things and they would not tell the parent. They would do those things and they would say there were complications and little Johnny is ready to go. There were complications and little Janie, here she is. We've figured it all out. It's okay. Don't worry about it. We won't talk about it. Just go. ISNA, and when I say ISNA, I'm referring back to the Intersex Society in North America. One of the things that they kind of spurred or started was this idea of intersex activism. And there are several different groups that have gone around. They've provided training or produced training materials. They go around and hold seminars, educational classes at various hospitals all over the country, educating physicians on intersex. And most of these people that go and do this educational outreach are intersex themselves. They will go and they talk about their life experience. They will go and they will explain to physicians what ramifications can occur from making the incorrect choice, which happens a lot. They will talk about non-surgical intervention. They will talk about the individual's right to self-determination. And they will try to change the attitude and official policy, attitudes of doctors and official policy of hospitals through this activists network. That's very slow and tedious work. Hospital to hospital to hospital has different policy. Hospital groups, Kaiser, IHC, these networks that we hear about, Mountain Star, they will have their own policy and that they will have to be addressed on an individual basis. Serious consideration is given to legal issues. Is the hospital liable for these things? Changing policy just doesn't happen because a doctor says, "Oh, I see the light. We'll change now." This is a big deal to change hospital policy. So change in the medical community regarding surgical intervention or non-intervention is happening slowly. As slowly as it's happening in that community, it's happening even slower in the realm of the parent. For most parents of these intersex children, intersex infants, this is the first time they've ever even considered or thought about an intersex possibility. This is way off the radar. And they want to be able to tell the world very quickly that they've got little Joey or little Susie. And I'm using very stereotypical, heteronormative white names, just because that's what rolls off my tongue. But they want to get home. They want to show off the baby. They want to hold it up in church, wearing a blessing gown, blessing suit, show the world, show off their child. And that's very understandable that they want to do that. They want to introduce their child to the world in a normal way. Anything that deviates from normal can sometimes be looked at as shameful or embarrassing, or something's wrong with the parents. Oh, come on, dude. What's wrong with you? You put out an intersex baby? Your little boy has no penis, which, by the way, is a condition. It's a laughing matter to those individuals who have no experience with this. It's life or death for the child who is intersex.
Can you speak about that really quickly? What do you mean by life or death? Because you've mentioned that several times. Like, these are conditions that can actually...
These are conditions that can deal with potassium, sodium, internal organs, all kinds of things with gastrointestinal tract that can be affected in some individuals. If their vagina is fused at birth, if their labia is fused at birth, they can't urinate. It would be considered a disorder of sexual development. If the labia is fused and they cannot urinate, that needs to be immediately intervened. There are hernia conditions where the abdominal wall is breached and various organs are either poking through the muscular wall or the abdominal cavity itself, and they're external. In males, there's a condition called hypospadias, where the urethra exits the penis not at the tip, but somewhere along the base of the penis before it reaches the tip of the penis. And that can be a problem as far as urinary tract infections, bladder infections. So there are several things that, and it's not hyperbole to say that these are life and death situations or conditions, because it really is true. There are less serious intersex conditions that don't manifest themselves in a dangerous way, but do manifest themselves in a cosmetic way, so that the babysitter might have questions, or grandma might have questions about, little Joey. How come little Joey's not quite right? Or why aren't you circumcising this little baby? Even circumcision is its own hot topic, and I've got serious societal and religious thoughts about circumcision, which certainly circumcision does not fall under intersex, because that's something that happens, post-birth to a normally developed male individual. But I kind of go back to, when this intersex condition presents itself in the life of a young couple, what is the Hippocratic Oath? The basis of the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. If this infant, this glorious infant, needs no immediate medical intervention, leave that child alone. Let that child manifest its own destiny when it's ready to. Let that child speak to its own identity as it's growing up. That child's got a long time to live to figure out who they are. And many of these things that doctors and parents get so excited about correcting immediately after birth, the child can live for a long, long, long time without anything happening to them artificially, and live a very happy and productive life. I think most of these early interventions, these surgical interventions, are instigated by embarrassment. These parents are embarrassed to take home these babies and not know what to tell the world. They're ashamed to let anyone change a diaper or let anyone bathe them, because it invites uncomfortable questions. Sometimes are very embarrassing. If that's a problem, don't have your kids. Don't have children. If you're going to be a parent, you've got to accept these children as they are. This goes back to this larger idea that's found in my book, that these children are born this way. They come from, in the LDS theology, they come from God. They come from their pre-existence, programmed a certain way. They enter into this world a certain way. There are many things we don't correct at birth. There are many things we do correct at birth. Let these children, unless it's medically necessary, let these children determine their own course of their lives.
Because I think what you're getting at when you say that there's intervention and then there's a mistake made in that intervention is that if a child is presenting with intersex chromosomal and biological DNA or genetics or whatever that is, and you make that decision that, well, we're going to anatomically make sure this child can present as a female, for example, but then later on in life, that child now resonates more with a kind of typical identification of male gender, then that's the mistake you're talking about. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I would certainly ask the individual that has happened to whether they would consider it a mistake or not. But I would say that in most cases they would consider it a mistake that had happened to them at a point in their life when they had no voice.
Because it really could have gone either way. They could have chosen
In
male
some
anatomy or female anatomy as far as the intervention the doctors or the parents chose at infancy.
Right. Well, the harsh reality of the matter is that it's easier to make a boy with anatomical differences into a girl than it is to make a girl into a boy. That's just the way that it works. But there are many, many, many cases where a parent or a doctor has chosen a specific gender presentation, and later on in life that individual has decided that that's not how they feel. So there needs to be a change made. Not always, though. It's so like so. There's 31 individual DSDs, disorders of sexual development. For every one of those individual diagnosable conditions, you will have a myriad of real-lived experience.
Sure.
So to paint with a broad brush really does everyone a disservice.
But this is also why you're saying if we could tolerate allowing the ambiguity as a culture and as parents and as church societies and as general societies, then we'd be offering a favor to those children who then over time would have a better idea of how they might want to identify.
Well, it would be the same as saying to your child on the day that they were born that they were going to be a fireman. And they may decide later on in life that they don't want to be a fireman. Well, we decided for you that you're going to be a fireman the day that you were born. And it's completely unfair to think that we can predetermine an individual's trajectory for their entire life based on what's convenient, what's not embarrassing for us as a parent. It's irresponsible, especially if we're looking at surgical intervention that is medically unnecessary. Absolutely. And I talk about this all the time when I'm doing my presentations for my book. I think that we have a big, big problem in the LDS Church. I'm a lifelong member. I'm 47 years old. Temple sealing, mission, choir director, primary teacher, gospel doctrine, the 9 yards, that's me. I understand Mormon culture very, very well. I understand also the overwhelming presence of guilt and shame. And I really, truly, honestly think that if we can eliminate those two things from our culture, that we will have a much easier time navigating the various LGBT situations that our children present to us. But specifically, we'll be able to understand with empathy towards the infant this intersex condition which can present itself at birth. You wouldn't dare make a decision for someone who has no voice that lasts their entire life. But that's exactly what's happening when doctors, medical professionals, and parents decide to determine the lived gender of an individual that is 1 or 2 or 3 days old. It's really quite unfair. And it speaks to the idea of agency as well. I'm removing this child's agency. I'm taking away this child's ability to act as an agent unto themselves by assigning them a particular gender role that may or may not be accurate. Now let's get real. In most births, in most live births, the gender presentation, the anatomic presentation, it's there, it's great, it's perfect, we're thankful, we feel blessed, we sigh a deep sigh of relief, we can move forward with confidence. And thank heavens we can, because life's full of enough challenges. Life's full of enough problems as it is. But when we have this chance to cut the individual some slack and to not judge and to not intervene on their behalf when they have no voice, I say we err on the side of the child.
And I would absolutely agree with everything you just said. The only thing that I'll just kind of expand a little bit on is because you're, in a sense, taking parents to task, right? Like, hello, you need to be able to tolerate this type of ambiguity and anxiety.
I'm not sure I'm taking parents to task, because this is an incredibly difficult challenge. It's an incredibly difficult choice to make. You feel like the fuse is burning, the clock is ticking, everyone's expecting you to have all the answers, and you feel immense social pressure to make a decision that probably needs a while to come to a resolution. So I'm not going to say I'm calling parents out or calling them to task, because this is probably one of the most significant or delicate decisions they will ever have to make. And I would not want to, give undue pressure to someone who's faced with that. That's not fair to me. But I would say, generally speaking, as a culture, if we can back off with the guilt and back off with the shame and let the individual decide for themselves how to treat their children, or let their child grow up and determine for themselves how they want to live, I think, yes, I am calling people to task for that. Absolutely.
Well, and I think I was just going to, in a sense, mirror what you just said. And this is why it's not just parents of intersex individuals that need to have this aha moment or this light bulb go off. It's our entire culture. Because when you're sitting there with an intersex infant in your arms, you're already thinking about the projection of that child's life. And we know in this culture that the bullying and the stigma, but just almost the evil vitriol that people can put forth in this particular department is so staggering. And so I can understand, even though I agree with you that we need to allow for that time, and that's the best case scenario, and I think we're coming through, with more information on that. I can also understand how in the past parents are scared for their children. Parents are like, I need to protect my children from that type of bullying, and we need to make it very clear. And in fact, this is, I think, why we see a lot of parents who won't even educate their children that this happened to them when they were, a lot of people don't even know this happened to them as children, because their parents are trying to protect them from this big, horrible, scary thing that, quite frankly, has borne out in history. That, the amount of people who get killed or are violently assaulted who are dealing with these issues is statistically higher, and it's awful. This is a cultural shift that has to happen. It's just, that's the only part I want to add. I don't want to take away from anything you said.
Well, right.
I just want to add that, and you already said it too, but just that idea that it's not just intersex parents that need to make this shift. We all need to make this shift, because there are people amongst us who are living with these types of conditions and need this type of space that you are very eloquently describing.
Well, thank you. I hope it's eloquent. At times I just feel like I am pumping quarters in the machine and I start to ramble.
I think you're fine. Okay, so from there, I guess, unless you want to respond to what I just said, I think...
No, I agree. I think that a paradigm shift is in order. A broadening of understanding is in order on many levels, not only within Mormonism, not only within the church, but within society at large. And I think that the members of the church that resist this paradigm expansion, they do it under a religious context that is largely based out of fear. That we're supposed to know all these things, that we have this plan of happiness, this plan of salvation where everything is predetermined and spelled out, and the trajectory of our life is pretty ordered. And really, to most LDS people in Utah anyway, the biggest decision that they'll make for their kids is whether they're going to go to BYU or the U. And that can be a huge societal stigma as well. So I think this idea that we back off, we let these people, determine the course of their life, whether it's their gender identity, their gender expression, their sexual orientation, whether they're a Ute fan or a Cougar fan, or whether they like mayonnaise or Miracle Whip. You got to back off and let people live their life.
Right. And you've brought up Mormonism a lot, which we have this family proclamation that talks about gender, and it does tend to talk about it in very binary ways. I will say that the one comment that has shed some hope came from Elder Oaks a year or two back, when he actually mentioned, in the context of transgender, that there's still a lot of information we need to understand and have more knowledge.
That quote goes it goes thusly: "We have some teaching yet to do on that subject," which lends me to believe that they have some information that they have yet to share. That's the way he said that. The way it was said, he did use the word transgender, which in and of itself is light years beyond what we heard in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Literally light years beyond.
And most of what we still hear today. But there was this one quote where he used that terminology, and it was very helpful to see that there was still space, it seemed like, for decisions to be made going forward.
It seems that way. Now, Elder Oaks is an attorney, and Elder Oaks has been known to skillfully use the English language.
I concur with that. And it's interesting even how you said, you feel like there's information. I felt like, yes, it does seem like it would mean they have information. I felt like it was a way to use the language in a sense that there's room for information to still be learned. I don't believe that they have. I think there's a lot of learning that needs to happen within the leadership of the church about these issues.
Here's Elder Oaks' quote: "This question concerns transgender, and I think we need to acknowledge that while we have been acquainted with lesbians and homosexuals for some time, being acquainted with the unique problems of a transgender situation is something we have had not so much experience with, and we have some unfinished business in teaching on that." So in that paragraph, in that statement, he uses the word transgender, lesbian, and homosexual. Then I think that that's probably the first time that's ever happened in church history.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if because there was a woman leader who also used the word homosexual versus same-sex attraction at a conference, and it happened about the same time. So, so there was kind of, I think, around the same time, because that quote came from an interview he was giving, I believe, to the Salt Lake Tribune about this.
It came from a press conference.
Right. So at the press conference where they were talking about rights for LGBT folks, this woman who was one of the spokesperson, I forget her name, but she's one of the leaders in our church, she used correct terminology as well. I remember because we all made a big deal about that. And then Elder Oaks, in an interview about that press conference, used this language as well. So that was the first time that I heard them use terminology that was different from just same-sex attraction, which is what is typically used in our Mormonism.
So I'm looking at slate.com, and it talks about this press conference in detail. Elder Oaks is asked from a mother. She stands up and she says, quote, "I have a transgender son who came out to us about a year ago. I hate having to fear what retaliation from church leaders I might have for supporting him. I think we as members need that assurance that we can indeed have our own opinions, support our children, and still follow our beliefs." And then Elder Oaks responded with that quote, which seemed to be very off the top of his head. The Slate article does say that Oaks' tone was conciliatory and optimistic. So the proclamation on the family, the proclamation to the world, does use some interesting language when it talks about gender. And many faithful Mormons read that, and they read into it a lot of things that it doesn't say. They read into it this context that they were raised with this eternal family, the premortal existence, temple marriage and postmortal salvation, where a man and a woman reign as a couple. They work that into the proclamation. Second paragraph of the family, a proclamation to the world. It reads thusly. And I don't know if thusly is a word or not, but I'm going to use it anyway.
That sounds very scriptural.
It does. So let it be written, so let it be done. So here's how it reads. All human beings, male and female, are created in the image of God. Each is a beloved spirit, son, or daughter of heavenly parents, and as such, each has a divine nature and destiny. Gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. That is very binary. And as we know, medically speaking, there is a lot that can happen between strictly male and strictly female. Let's just ignore the transgender situation, as Elder Oaks calls it, just for a moment and specifically consider the intersex condition. These individuals are born here with characteristics that are male and are female, or leaning one way or leaning the other. There is no space in this proclamation for that individual. It's a doctrinal paradox that there isn't an answer for.
And just to clarify, I know that many people do not consider the Family Proclamation doctrine. It's not been canonized.
No, absolutely. But I do know this, that my stake president photocopied it, shrunk it down, glued it in his scriptures, and he refers to it as scripture.
Right. And I think that's very typical of our Mormon culture, in the sense that we do feel like things that come from the first presidency are scriptural in of themselves. I know people feel that way about the ensign, for example.
Certainly, and I'm not here to debate whether it's doctrine, whether it's not, whether it's scripture, whether it's not. I fully understand. Honestly, I completely understand where the individual is coming from that looks at the family as divinely inspired and as a blueprint for how things should work within their family. And that's their right to decide that. I don't want to take that away from them. But there is this dichotomy. There is this reality that even though the family, a proclamation to the world, states this very clearly and unambiguously, the lived reality of us on earth is that there are individuals born here that aren't male and they aren't female. What do we do with them?
And that a current apostle, in a sense, said that with this quote that you're mentioning from Elder Oaks, and did not refer this mother to the Family Proclamation statement.
Well, he certainly left a large open door. Now, I do know many parents of transgender children and transgender individuals themselves who look at this paragraph, the all human beings, male and female paragraph, as their salvation, as the thing that they hang their hat on. And they take great comfort in knowing that there is no specific language that states you were this way in the premortal existence, you were this way on earth, and you will be this way in the postmortal existence, in the eternal realms. That language is not spoken out.
Meaning that people who are living this experience find room in the language, for example, to say, okay, if gender's predetermined in the pre-existence, and I'm having some concerns or confusion with my gender in this particular mortal experience, that actually gives me room from this doctrinal Mormon sense that could be a mortal issue, that it doesn't mean that's what I'm stuck with.
Right. We know that there are many conditions that children are born with, and one that we immediately go to is a cleft palate. We would look at a child, an infant born with a cleft palate, and we would have pity on that child. And we would have compassion and love. And we would do anything we could to keep that child alive and to give that child a fighting chance at a normal existence. We know that this earth is temporal. We live according to Mormon doctrine, again, we live in a fallen state. We are not perfect on this earth. I just watched a documentary today, ironically, coincidentally. My son would say, you don't get to confuse those two words. Coincidentally and ironically mean two different things. Coincidentally, I watched a documentary today about thalidomide babies from the 50s, 60s, and 70s in England. And at the beginning of this thalidomide crisis, there was no medical connection. People didn't know where these thalidomide babies were coming from. If journalists, if a newspaper reporter didn't dig and look and ask questions, this thalidomide crisis would have been ignored and blown under the rug. And thousands of thalidomide babies would have been looked at as, this is how they came. Something happened. We don't give the intersex individual that grace. We don't give them that opportunity for compassion. We don't give them that opportunity to choose for themselves who they wish to be. We certainly don't extend that to the transgender individual. Because without a medical condition, people look at a transgender person and they just think that they are confused. They are mentally deficient. They are crazy. And all those things are, medically speaking, incorrect. The Diagnostic Statistical Manual eliminated transgenderism as a mental condition in the late 90s, I believe. Science has decided that transgender individuals aren't crazy. They're not mentally ill. This is a physical condition. And the treatment, the medically correct treatment, is to align the body with the spirit. And if we think about Mormon doctrine, which is a more accurate representation of who we are? Our eternal spirit, our eternal identity as a spirit child of our Heavenly Father, as a spirit child of our heavenly parents and our loving Heavenly Mother? Or is our reality here on earth the way we are in the heavens, in the eternities? I would say in the condition or the situation of a cleft palate baby, no one would dare say or dream of saying that you will be resurrected with a perfected body that includes a cleft palate. But we don't offer that same opportunity to the individual who is intersex, and especially not the individual who is transgender. So the transgender individual looks back, coming back around to the family, a proclamation to the world. We come back to this idea that gender is an essential characteristic of individual, premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. The transgender individual can look at that and say, I live in a mortal existence. I live in a temporal world. I live in a fallen state. My condition here on this earth is not as it was in the premortal existence. My condition here on this earth is not as I'm going to be once I'm resurrected and perfected. In my core being, I do not feel the way that I am presenting to the world. I feel as if I am this other gender, or a spectrum of other genders. The transgender individual is the only time that I know of within the church where we demand that the temporal body dictates the spirit. It's the only time.
I think from a Mormon perspective, this is a very doctrinally sound way to manage issues of intersex and even issues of transgender. At the same time, I know I've spoken with several intersex and transgender members of our Mormon community. And this is also offensive to them that we might frame it in this way. Can you explain why that might be? Or are you aware of how people feel about this on the other side of the spectrum?
Well, I think people find it offensive because they see the social fallout of this very extremely binary way of thinking. And it gives no room for them to even exist at all. Recently, we've been told that there are no homosexual members of the church. And I think that in that way it's offensive, that they're trying to eliminate identity.
Which would speak to this kind of idea that homosexuality is part of the mortal, fallen world, and when we get resurrected, nobody's going to be homosexual. And
right.
Most of the homosexual people I have spoken with disagree with that wholeheartedly. They see that very much as part of their identity, who they are, where they've come from, where they're going, if they believe in those things.
I'm going to read Article of Faith number 9. It states, "We believe all that God has revealed, all that he does now reveal, and we believe that he will yet reveal many great and important things pertaining to the kingdom of God." I think as members of the church, we conveniently forget and ignore Article of Faith number 9. Article of Faith number 9 demands that within the framework of Mormonism, we have a really large place set aside for things that we don't know yet. It gives tremendous credibility to the idea that the prophet of God, the man who's chosen, predestined, set apart to speak as the mouthpiece for God on earth, we take away that ability from him to communicate with God when we say, no, this is the way that it is. It will never change. Quite clearly, Joseph Smith believed very early on in the Restorationist period that God can change his mind. You know, we have this idea that doctrine is unchanging. And I don't want to get into all the things that are speculative and somewhat offensive to people who are trying to maintain a pure faith. That's not the point of this podcast, nor is that my intention in life. But I think that we ignore this very real possibility that the LDS Church theologically will change in very radical ways, and in ways that we may not recognize, and in ways that are painful to accept. It has happened before several times. An Article of Faith, number 9, quite clearly states it's going to happen again, many times. He will yet reveal many great and important things. I have to say that within the framework of Mormon theology, the LG and the B, the lesbian, the bisexual, and the gay experience certainly would fall in the category of great and important things pertaining to the kingdom of God, specifically when we go back and talk about the proclamation, or a proclamation to the world. Those are great and important things that pertain to the kingdom of God. The proclamation talks about the kingdom of God when it mentions our eternal identity and purpose. So if God has yet to reveal many great and important things about the eternities, maybe, just maybe, we as LDS faithful can leave a giant place of grace and compassion and love for those individuals and those situations that we don't understand. I think that Article of Faith number 9 demands it. If we teach those Articles of Faith to our primary children, if we ask them to memorize them and recite them when they graduate from primary, then we need to remember them after we graduate from primary and give them as much importance in our adult life as we expected our children to place on them when they're in primary.
Well, and what you're describing is where my Mormonism hangs. There's nothing you just said that I would not agree with, other than I might phrase God changes his mind to, I think we just understand God's will, or are prepared to understand God's will differently at different times of...
And that's very fair too. Saying God changes his mind is a little flippant.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right, but I think we're getting to the same point. I think the
Right.
tension that happens within Mormon culture around this issue is that if our leaders were saying what you just said, which in essence is a little bit of what Elder Oaks was saying with that quote that you gave, which is we don't yet understand, or there's still things we need to learn, or there's still things we...
Oaks did not say there are things that we need to learn.
Sure, I know, but
yeah,
however he said that, whatever language that means, even if we just said there are things we still need to teach,
right,
that opens up possibilities, that there's a possibility for something different in the future.
I would think so.
Versus the tension with what Elder Bednar said, which is that homosexuals do not exist,
Right.
and therefore, when a believing, righteous-minded member of our church wants to be a good member, well, we follow the prophets. We have faith that the prophets are speaking for God. And so that's, I think, where the tension lies. If our leaders would say things like, there are still great things that we don't know about this. We are looking forward to the time when things will be revealed. But they're not currently saying that about many of these types of issues. And so I think that's the tension that we see playing over and over again within our own belief system is, are there things that are going to be revealed in the future? Well, yes. At the same time, there are current prophets saying this is the way it is now, and this is coming from God. It's not coming from me. It's coming from God. So do you see what I'm saying? That's just kind of the tension I think we're currently struggling with as an overall community.
Understand. I live within that paradigm the same way that you do. I understand both sides of that coin very clearly, and you can't look at them both at the same time, unfortunately.
Yes.
It's very difficult.
Right. So we have obviously digressed into great doctrinal discourse, which is always fun to do.
I think it's appropriate because much of our understanding of intersex and transgender policy within the church is based on doctrine, and much of that doctrine is hypothetical at best.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think it's a very important conversation to have and to consider and to think about and to really listen to different people's perspectives on. So thank you so much for bringing all of this up. So moving forward then, you mentioned at the very beginning, is there any other information you'd want to give as far as intersex education goes before I move to the transgender? I would
just say this, that if there is a parent who is the lucky parent, I'm going to cry. If there is a parent who is blessed enough to have an individual placed in their care that needs a decision made, that they understand the ramifications of those decisions, they understand their rights as a patient in a hospital, that they don't need to be bullied by a doctor or by a board of clinicians, that they have rights of self-determination and of medical non-intervention, both for their child and for their child's future, for their future child. They don't have to do anything unless the child is in danger. If the child is not in danger, then for heaven's sake, dress him in green. There's lots of shades of green that are cute. Purple is nice. Even blue on girls is so super cute. And pink on guys, come on, get over your hypermasculine stereotypical behavior. So I preach this very strongly when I do my Mama Dragon events, my Mama Dragon Story Project events. I need to clarify that we really allow our superego, our jealous, egotistical, inflated sense of self determine things that really we shouldn't be determining for others. And what parent would do anything to their child to harm them in the short term or looking forward to their entire life. I just don't. I think parents need the freedom to make those decisions for themselves and for their child. It's just so important.
And I would second that and add that there are many wonderful resources to help people these days, more so than ever before, in helping parents have the support they need to do exactly what you just said. And then those of us who are in supporting roles in people's lives like that, to make sure we do our part as well, so that we're not making inappropriate comments or asking questions that are crass, or that we're making assumptions or projecting our own ideas of what we think a parent should have done in those situations.
Right, and I think that goes along with the judging. We shouldn't judge our children for, heaven's sake here. We've trained our children, we've taught them correct principles, and here we are giving them the chance to act for themselves. When your child makes a decision regarding their child, your grandchild, shouldn't you give your child the freedom to make that choice without judging and without second-guessing them? I would hope so.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned at the very beginning that those who are intersex, oftentimes they will have a very similar trajectory as those who are transgender. And just to be clear, intersex and transgender are not the same. So in other words, you do not need to be intersex to be transgender. And you may be intersex and have been and feel very comfortable with the gender that was assigned to you, or that you were allowed to assign to yourself over time. So those things don't always fall in line together. But oftentimes, especially in the case of the scenarios where somebody is born intersex, maybe doesn't realize that there's no external features, or at least not enough to cause concern, and then is considered a certain gender, and then later on in life, or even pretty early on, we know a lot of transgender folks feel pretty early on that they don't fit with the gender that they've been assigned from ages like 4, 5, and 6. So then it becomes kind of a similar trajectory. Is that fair as to what you were alluding to?
Well, and again, with 31 individual trans or intersex conditions, there certainly is a broad spectrum of experience. But there are many intersex conditions that are not diagnosed until puberty, until early adulthood, when women go to conceive and they learn that they don't have a uterus, and instead of ovaries they have undescended testicles, and they are genetically XY, but they look, for all intents and purposes, as a genetic female. That condition is actually quite common.
And that was with no medical intervention, that everybody
absolutely
believed that this was a girl being born, and now there's this problem.
There are, and this is somewhat hard to believe, but there are many fashion models who are women who are intersex men, but who are living and identify and have always identified and have always lived as women.
Why models in particular?
They're tall. There are at least 2 conditions of intersex where tallness is a result of a hormonal deficiency or a physiological inability to absorb estrogen or testosterone. They're tall, they're thin, they have a lanky frame and no muscular build, and very small breasts. And if you look at European models, size 2, 5'11" to 6'1", with an A cup to a B at the max, you're looking at a supermodel frame right there. So, and that's not hyperbolic to say that. I hope that that's clear, that the scenario that I'm describing is common. It's not all of them. I can't say that. But I know that there are several who identify as intersex. This late life experience, when you decide that you are going to change your presentation or your lived identity, either as the realization of an intersex condition, a late life diagnosis, or as the transgender individual deciding to transition from a previous gender into a gender that they identify with. Those two experiences actually kind of intertwine and mesh. Not to say that the intersex experience and the transgender experience are identical, they are not, because the intersex individual will have medical considerations that the transgender individual has separate and distinct considerations as well. But by and large, there's a reconciliation that needs to happen between a previous lived identity and a legal identity moving forward. And so those processes, those procedures, legal matters, professional matters, they tend to overlap quite easily, actually, quite obviously.
Can you give more specific examples as to things you might be talking about?
You would at some point, so I had this discussion it was yesterday. I had this discussion with the mother of a transgender child yesterday, and their child is preparing to get their driver's license. The child wants to postpone getting their driver's license because the gender that will be on the driver license will not be the gender that they identify as. And that piece of identification, your driver license, is literally the kingpin or the first step in every other legal documentation that you have moving forward. It supersedes a birth certificate on nearly every level except for that of a passport. So I can see there are many transgender individuals who will hesitate getting their identification changed to a gender congruous name, or if you're Joe and you need to live as Sally, you're living as Sally, but your driver license says male, and you get pulled over for a speeding ticket, and for example, your insurance doesn't align, your insurance cards don't align with your driver license, your gender on your driver's license does not align with the name that you're using. You know, there are some serious trickle-down things that we kind of really don't even think about. Then let's talk about travel. Do you leave the country with a passport that has a name that doesn't align with who you are, or a gender that doesn't align with who you are? Do you enroll in school, in college, with mismatched identification? Do you seek employment with a new driver's license and a social security card that don't match? That then becomes a federal issue where the Social Security Administration and your employer now have, they call it a mismatch, where legally the person who you're identifying as with your employer is not recognized by the federal government or the Social Security Administration. Not to mention, when you graduate from college, your diploma will be under the name that you are legally known as. Your transcripts are now known as the name you are legally known as. So to go back later in life and change your Social Security card, to have a new passport issued, to get a new driver's license, to get a new diploma, to get new transcripts, you have to, in order to move forward, and let's not even talk about insurance. You know, how does a transgender man, for example, who may still have a uterus and ovaries, how does a transgender man get a hysterectomy or a pap smear without causing all kinds of embarrassing situations at the hospital or at their doctor's office? How does a transgender woman go in for a mammogram with a gender marker of M? You know, breast cancer is not that unusual in males. That's true. But you go in and your gender on your identification doesn't match with your presentation or your physical characteristics. You know, there are many transgender individuals who are uninsured, who, even though they may be insured, choose not to take advantage of services that they've paid for because their identification doesn't match with who they're physically presenting as. You go through a TSA checkpoint. You're forced to undergo a full body 3D scan. Many individuals, there's a website, in fact, called travelingwhiletrans.org, I believe. And it talks about precautions, things you can do if you're traveling as a transgender individual, things that you should know. Some things, there are some stories on there that talk about people going through TSA and having negative experiences and having it be very embarrassing. There are stories on that website that talk about not going to professional conferences that can have ramifications with employment. And the reason they don't go to professional conferences is because they're terrified of traveling and being misgendered on TSA. There's this domino effect that when you change your gender, you have a series of legal documents that help shape and determine your legal identity and your professional and social life moving forward. You know, some people won't go to a bar or a nightclub because they're embarrassed that the doorman or the bouncer will see their ID and call them out. Here I am, this cute little 21-year-old girl going to a club and my driver's license says M. How embarrassing is that to be out with your girlfriends and have the bouncer go, not quite sure who you are.
So how I guess my biggest question as to what you're bringing up is how difficult is it to change these documents once they're set a certain way? Like how does that process even evolve? And what I also want to just say right now is that this would be what we would call cisgender privilege. So those of us who are not transgender, we are referred to as cisgender, and these are things, like you said, we don't even think about, consider, doesn't even cross our mind.
Right. So how easy it is to change those things is entirely dependent on the state that you live in and the state that you were born in. For example, there are 4 states that do not allow you to modify or alter your original birth certificate or apply for an amended birth certificate.
Ever, no matter what.
No matter what. It is physically, legally impossible to ask for a corrected birth certificate, which, as we know, is a major document in many things. To get your name changed legally varies wildly by county, by state. It's done all the time in every state in the U.S., and I understand, clearly there are listeners that will not be from America. I don't know Canada's legal system. I don't know the UK or Europe or Scandinavia's legal system. I'm certainly unfamiliar with South America or Africa or Asia's legal system on how easy it is to change those documents. I can only speak to the U.S. The Social Security Administration lets you change your name on your card without an amended birth certificate. The Social Security Administration only requires a legal name change document, which would be issued by a court or a judge. When the individual changes his name or her name with the Social Security Administration, they do not receive a new number. The number stays the same. It is assigned to you when you first apply for a Social Security card as a child. That number stays with you. The Social Security Administration does allow you to change your name on your card with a legal name change court order. And it is very easy and seamless and painless to walk in to any administration office, any Social Security Administration office, with your name change document, with your, I believe that's all you need, actually. Go in, have a new one issued, and then I believe it's within a month-ish, you will get a new card with the old number and your new name. You don't need a Social Security card to go get a new driver license A driver's DMV will ask for a legal name change document to change your, in Utah at least, and many other states, I believe it's the same, but I can't speak to all 50, they will require a court order name change document, and then they will change your name. To change your gender marker, you can go about this 2 different ways in several states. You can change your gender marker either via a court order, which requires its own set of conditions to be met, or you can get your gender marker changed via, at the DMV at least in many states, you can get your gender marker changed if you have met the requirements as prescribed by a doctor that state, and the doctor's letter will state that you are undergoing appropriate treatment for gender dysphoria. Now that phrase appropriate treatment can mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to undergo a full gender reassignment surgery. You can be undergoing hormonal treatment for a male to female individual and have your name and your gender marker changed. You don't necessarily have to have breast implants or the full surgery downstairs, to use terms that are not so crass. In the case of the female to male transsexual, they do not necessarily need to have the downstairs, the bottom surgery. They may need to fulfill the requirements set forth by their treating physician, which generally speaking means that they have had a double mastectomy and have had their breasts removed, have had the chest wall reconstructed to be more masculine, and that's not an easy surgery to undergo. It's a little more involved actually than just a regular mastectomy.
So which brings up a whole nother issue, which means whether or not you can afford those types of surgeries, whether or not your insurance would cover those types of surgeries.
Right. And so I think the mode is now, legally speaking, that your doctor gets to kind of say, all right, here's an individual, has a unique set of circumstances. They may not be able to afford a full transition, yet they've made a commitment, a social commitment, a personal commitment to living as a new gender. They do require new identification to move forward and be accepted more fully, to be employed, to get education, to continue their life in a way that is more cis, privileged. Once you have these pieces of identification, you can really move forward pretty easily with the things that you need to do to be a functioning, contributing member of society, to vote, to drive, to be insured, to be employed, certainly. So the doctor has quite a bit of leeway as to what they would consider appropriate medical treatment. And that would be a personal decision between the patient and the caregiver.
So you're basically bringing up many of the types of issues that people are having to struggle with and decide. Even surgery is a controversial one for many. There are many transgender individuals who never undergo any surgery, or even hormone replacement treatments. And of course there are many who do, which maybe this is a good time to talk about the bathroom issue that we're having in this country currently, as far as how we as a public are comfortable with certain expressions of gender, whereas not comfortable with others, and how that's translating into this frenzy and fear and anxiety around some of these issues that we see happening today.
The bathroom issue is a very hot topic, and I see it mainly as a political tool used to generate votes within a certain demographic or political ideology. And it's certainly up to the individual politician, the individual citizen, to decide where they identify politically and what tenets they choose to, what platforms they choose to identify themselves with. And my comments are in no way meant to take away the individual's right to choose for themselves how to express themselves politically. I see the bathroom issue as a much more practical issue And I look at it in terms, quite honestly, as a civil rights issue, more specifically as a civil liberties issue, in that if laws are put into place that require an individual to use a restroom that identifies with their gender as listed on their birth certificate, then essentially two things need to happen. The first thing that needs to happen is there needs to be someone at every restroom who is checking everyone's birth certificate. Because if they're not checking everyone's birth certificate equally, then we run into some issues legally about discrimination, equal treatment, equal justice, all kinds of really deep-rooted legal things that have been settled at the Supreme Court years ago. It also brings into consideration this idea that we are guilty before we are innocent, which is not how the United States legal system works. We are innocent until proven guilty. It also requires every individual that wants to ever use a public restroom to have with them all the time their birth certificate and to subject themselves to a search. I'm presenting you this legally authorized individual who's at the bathroom checking my birth certificate to make sure it aligns with my gender that I'm presenting as. So if we think that the TSA is invasive, if we think that taking off our shoes and our belt and standing in a cylinder and having our arms up and having a scanner spin around us, if we think that that is invasive, then we haven't even considered how invasive it's going to be for an individual to stand at a restroom, to demand that we produce our birth certificate, and to subject ourselves to what essentially would be considered a strip search, to inspect you, to make sure that your genitalia, your external genitalia, matches that which is on your birth certificate. I can't imagine any person in the United States of any political persuasion subjecting themselves willingly to that amount of invasion. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, people are going to be up in arms. Well, what about the kids? What about the daughters? What about the... I look at this as a much larger issue. This is something that we fought against in World War II. This idea that one party controls everything that you do. The Berlin Wall came down because people were done with that system. We don't want regulation of every single facet of our everyday lives. It's reprehensible. So then as a polite society, how do we behave? Well, the bathroom issue, as polarizing as it is actually pretty humorous to me when we consider that for, let's say, the past 50 years, ever since Christine Jorgensen had her groundbreaking gender reassignment surgery in the 40s, after World War II, there have been individuals using the bathroom that don't align with their gender from birth, and it was never a problem. It's never a concern. Nobody knew. Nobody said anything. Didn't make the news. Certainly there's no history of crimes being committed for the past 60 years, almost 70 years. If we look at countries that have laws enacted that allow you to attend the restroom that is other than that which is on your birth certificate, none of those countries have statistically shown an increase of violence of transgender individuals towards others in a bathroom. Zero. Additionally, states in the United States that have laws that state you can attend the bathroom of your choosing, zero incidents, not one reported incidence of a transgender individual using a bathroom and committing an assault or committing a crime. There are none no experience is reported. So to all of a sudden claim that we are outraged and that it's a public threat is inaccurate, and it's incendiary. It's not true. Additionally, we are allowing the possibility that our young men, if we're so concerned about the women, here's where we can jump off on a series of tangents that are about 500 bullet points long, and to talk about any of them is in my opinion a waste of time. The issue is false. It's not true. And as we've seen in the past week, individuals are being called out as transgender that are not transgender. So now we run into issues of, how girly is girly enough? How butch is man enough? Do you look like a man? Do you look like a woman? Today, in Utah, in Clinton, Utah, which is in northern Utah, a man was assaulted by another man in a Walmart bathroom because he had his daughter in the bathroom with him. Somebody was offended and said that she shouldn't be in there, and it came to blows, and the police were called and an arrest was made. Today. And today, for the record, is Thursday, May 26th.
Of 2016.
2016, yes.
Not 1952.
Right. Because podcasts, sorry, Back to the Future girl, they didn't exist back then.
Right.
So I understand why the bathroom issue is in play. There are political forces who are concocting legislation, who are throwing it at various municipalities and states to see what's going to stick. In my opinion, it will rise to the Supreme Court, and they will all be struck down as unconstitutional in several ways. Not to mention, it's just mean. Transgender individuals got to go to the bathroom. Where do you want them to go? Do you want to deny them services? Do you want to deny them the privilege of exiting their home and participating in society? Do you want to keep them in their home and only use their own bathroom, which, by the way, would be multi-gendered?
As most of our home bathrooms are.
Right. I saw a picture today that showed a very interesting bathroom layout. And it had two aisles. They faced each other. Each aisle had separate rooms with a separate door from floor to ceiling, a self-contained room. One side of the picture, it said urinals. One side of the room, it said toilets. And then it had a common area for washing hands. It seems to me that moving forward with new construction, certainly it's easy to make a restroom situation not be so binary, to go back to that term. How do we deal with bathrooms that are already in place in millions of buildings all over the country? They go in, they use the bathroom, hopefully they wash their hands.
That does seem like the bigger issue.
And yes. I don't care where you go to the bathroom, as long as you wash and dry your hands before you hug me or shake my hand. Now, again, I do understand the outrage. I understand the need, the desire to protect your children. I understand that. But I think at its core, when it's really looked at, it's a civil liberties issue. It's a logistical issue. It's an enforcement issue. And I think what's going to happen when these I'm not even going to go there because it's wasting time.
Yeah, I agree. There's 500 different scenarios that we could talk about. I think the only thing I would add to this, as far as going down one of those tangents, is that predators come in all shapes, sizes, gender, etc. And therefore, pointing out a certain community, like the transgender community, as if we do this, there's going to be a higher level of predatorial issues for our children, is absolutely unfounded, like you said. And predators will take advantage of any situation they can take advantage of if they're going to be predatorial, regardless of this particular issue. So that continues to be a problem. The facts remain that transgender individuals tend to be violently acted upon. So I think just the little pushback, not pushback to your point, but I'm just saying I think what many people in the public are concerned about is that a predator would pretend to be transgender in order to gain access to young people in the bathroom, right? But my experience with predators is that they will take advantage of all kinds of situations that we do not have an ability to police at the point that you're describing very well. So that's just a matter of doing good parental controls and making sure your children are escorted to bathroom scenarios, etc., like we've done all along anyway. We've done that anyway. I do that anyway. Right now, I do that. I'm concerned about my boys with a man in the bathroom, who is cisgender and heterosexual and is a predator, right? So it's not
at the cinema, at the multiplex, right? I think that it's a false outrage, and if we really want to protect our children from being abused and violated, then we need to look at statistics that play out historically about the type of abusers what is the type of abuser that will traditionally or statistically attack our children? What demographic, what slot, what characteristics do they fill? And by and large, who are these people? They're people that our children know.
They're our family and our friends.
That are in our homes.
Yes.
So if we want to protect our children, we need to learn who the true threats are and act accordingly. Not pretend that when we go to Target, some dude dressed up as a girl is going to try to assault my daughter. It's statistically that's not going to happen, but the opposite is true, that some dude that we know that's in a position of trust and authority and power over my children in my home is going to abuse and violate my child.
And in my church, and in my schools, and in my Boy Scout troops, and in my Girl Scout troops, and and that's why I think it speaks to a much scarier topic that most of us don't want to address.
That's what it is. It's easier to be outraged over the Target bathroom than it is to be outraged about my neighbor, or my cousin, or my uncle, or my father, or my mother, or my brother.
In situations where we have where we think we have control and may not have control.
No, we don't. If there's anything that we learn from those statistics, is that we do not have control.
Okay, so that was the one tangent I think was worth.
Oh, absolutely,
going down.
Oh no, absolutely.
All right, so what else do you want to speak to as far as transgender issues that can help the dialogue, the resources, whatever it is that people need to help them when they find themselves either in those situations or have a friend or family member who are in those situations?
Oh, geez, what to do? Well, if you're the individual that's experiencing that situation, your needs are quite a bit different than the individual who's the acquaintance or the friend or the family member or the ally. What resources are there? I think that the first resource would be that you need to be able to be safe and to remain alive and not to succumb to guilt and shame and go to that dark place where it's preferable to not be alive. And so I think just having an awareness of suicide hotlines, Trevor Project, there's actually a transgender suicide hotline that is staffed by only transgender people. They will get you if you call. I think that the individual's safety is first and foremost. I think also it's important to know, if you don't pass as the opposite gender, then you may need to, as hard as it is to say, you may need to alter where you go to protect yourself. One of the things that I keep telling these mothers of these transgender girls is that they need to be worrying about teaching their daughters self-protection, self-defense, just as much as they place an importance on clothing and makeup and hair and all those things that are stereotypically feminine. They need to teach their girls how to be aware of dangerous situations and how to defend themselves if necessary. Trans women are extremely at risk for violence. Transgender women of color are the most at-risk demographic in the country. The black trans woman, God bless them, because they live in a real dangerous world, and that is not hyperbole. It is very, very real. What resources are there for the parent? And if we're talking about strictly with an LDS perspective, the harsh reality is that when you go to your ecclesiastical leader, if it's your bishop or your stake president, they are woefully undertrained. And I'm not going to blame them. I'm not going to hold them responsible for being trained on everything, because these bishops, these stake presidents, they are lay individuals. They are not mental health professionals. They are not exposed to or have awareness of many of these LGBT issues, specifically transgender. So I'm not sure that I can hold the individual bishop or stake president, that liable. But I do believe that the church as a whole, knowing that statistically speaking, we have a high degree of LGBT individuals in the church, our youth, it is a disservice not to try to increase training, awareness and sensitivity training among leaders. Now I'll brag about my Mama Dragons in that they are on a local level, very local level, specifically targeting bishops and stake presidents with materials that they are putting together. One woman in particular in Utah County she's put together, gathered a wonderful packet of information that she has shared with her bishop. Her bishop shared with the stake president. The stake president has taken that information and is holding special educational outreach training sessions with bishops, and those bishops are then charged with taking this material to their wards. So there are very early, very tentative efforts being made by church leaders to train those that they are stewards over. But that impetus, that change, that is not coming from the top down. Rather, it's coming from the bottom up. It's coming from the individual ward member who has a family member who is in this LGBT continuum.
Right, and the current bishop's handbook actually will state that those who are undergoing surgeries, reassignment surgeries, will be disciplined and have been disciplined. So
the language in that is somewhat ambiguous, and it does give some discretion and some flexibility to bishops and stake presidents. And this speaks to this topic of leadership roulette, or the chance that one leader will treat you differently than another leader when they're both reading from the same manual. And that would be based on, personal bias or personal education or personal experience. The member of the church who has specific treatment as a transgender individual their course of discipline or non-discipline is not cut and dry. It's very interesting, actually, to meet and speak with these parents and these transgender individuals to see what is happening to them and what is not happening to them. So I think a transgender person has a wider latitude than we really think that they do. I would suggest, however, that if you're a transgender individual, you find yourself challenged with the decision, do I honor this inner person? Do I try to live a more authentic life? I would tell them not to confide in their bishop or their stake president. I would tell them not to seek ecclesiastical guidance from them. And I would tell them not to confess anything to them.
Until there is a better awareness if they would have luck in that leadership roulette, you mean, or just not at all?
Ever.
Ever, yeah. Well, and this becomes an issue because unless you're moving away from your ward, it is something that becomes somewhat known, right? I mean, if you
Right.
have been wearing dresses to church
Right.
for the last 10 years and now all of a sudden there are physical changes and you're not wearing dresses anymore and presenting more in the male typical ways that we think that males should present, then bishops are not often going to just sit back and say, okay, they're going to call you in for interviews and questioning, and that can become very distressing for sure.
Well, and it also, there's this idea that, bishops, now I don't want to disparage bishops because I've had some great bishops. I've known some incredible men who serve at the top of their game, day in and day out, and they are truly trying to be the shepherd to their flock, and I respect them, and I know of some of their challenges. And it's a calling that no one in their right mind would want. And so I don't want to make it sound like I'm calling out bishops as a group of evil men, because I do not think that that's true. But I do think that once you tell a leader anything about your personal life regarding LGBT issues, you are opening yourself for a line of discipline that may or may not be helpful to you, that may or may not be destructive to you or to your family. And rather than roll the dice and see what you're going to get as far as your leader is concerned, those matters, I think, spiritually are much better resolved speaking with your Father in heaven. Looking for guidance in a spiritual realm. Prayer. How do I move forward? How do I move forward authentically? I think that there are many, many things that we experience as mortals. We are told that we fall short of the grace of God in nearly everything that we do. Many of those things that we need to seek repentance about, we don't seek help or guidance from our bishops or our stake presidents. We don't talk about them or don't talk to them about many, many, many things. We seek guidance and forgiveness from our Heavenly Father on an individual basis. So I would say that for the transgender person, for an intersex person, to seek guidance from your lay bishop or stake president it's a mistake.
They're not trained in these types of issues, and that's not, again, like you said, it's not anything against bishops. This is not training that they receive in order to be able to help anybody know the correct both medical and psychological and emotional steps that a person needs to take to get help with these types of issues. And if
Right.
ecclesiastical leaders are listening, this is one of those areas where I would most definitely have somebody that you can refer people in your congregation to, or or ask to know who to refer to. And if you're going to, I guess, play a role as a spiritual leader in that person's life, it is to help them get in touch with resources that can really help.
Right.
Because like you started this podcast, the suicide rate for transgender individuals is significantly higher than the rest of the population.
It's 41%.
Thank you. So that you have somebody in your congregation who is in danger, and you, whether we like to take this responsibility or not, we all play a role, but ecclesiastical leaders will play a role in whether or not that person feels safe, feels validated, feels heard. And I empathize, like you're saying, because you're not given the type of training you need to know how to handle those situations.
Right. It's tremendously unfair to these men who are put in this position of stewardship, to expect them to be able to, and this goes for kind of a lot of mental health issues, marital issues, certainly LGBT issues. They're not given tools or training to speak to the reality of the situation. A lot of the training is on the fly. It's made up as they go. It's read and pray, and then read and pray again. And you're back for a third time. Okay, read and pray some more. And again, not to disparage these men, but that's all they've got. It's really, truly all they've got.
And I will just say that even in the mental health field, when it comes to transgender, we are ethically told to go ahead and refer to a trained professional in that particular area. So not even a general mental health practitioner should be seeing people with transgender issues. That's how serious this is. So imagine a bishop, right, with zero training. So even people who are trained generally, you really want to find somebody who's trained specifically in this particular area.
Out to them. Truly, my heart goes out to them when they are in a meeting with a person who confides in them, looking for guidance, genuine outreach towards their leader, and the leader is caught off guard. I feel bad for them. I really, really do. They're blindsided. They're wow.
Well, and in a sense, this podcast and other podcasts I've done, like over at Mormon Mental Health and definitely around issues of sexuality here at Mormon Sex Info, are hopefully, my goal, my hope is that they become part of that grassroots movement that you've said, where sometimes the knowledge comes from the bottom up versus the top down. And oftentimes we've seen in our church history where that is the process, how things change. It's not just
there are many instances where that is how revelation has come about, is from the bottom up.
Because it's the members who are being affected by certain issues.
They're the ones that see the need, and they're the ones that are moving. So I guess back to the original question, what resources are there for leaders? Is that what you were asking me?
Yeah, for leaders, for friends, for family, and for individuals themselves. So you've covered a lot of that. But
honestly, I think the only resource manual that I can speak to that they would have access to, that they would embrace wholeheartedly, is the Family Acceptance Project from Dr. Caitlin Ryan.
Yeah, that's a great resource.
She has modified her materials specifically for Latter-day Saint families with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender children. I have a copy of it in my hands. To send the Family Acceptance Project at San Francisco State University, familyproject.sfsu.edu.
And I will definitely link to that, as well as everything else you have mentioned.
Right. Caitlin's. I've met her twice. I've sat through 2 of her presentations. She is. Her research is very sound. I'm flipping through it now, and it's very heavy on data. But when you go through and extrapolate the data, it basically will tell you not to judge, and to love, and to empathize, and to affirm.
Yeah, she was the keynote speaker at the Mormon Mental Health Association conference last year that some of us organized, and she was excellent. Excellent materials. I would also say that SAMHSA has come out with a great pamphlet for supporting transgender youth.
I was in the room when they came out with their reparative therapy pamphlet. It was pretty amazing to be there. And quite frankly, if I can plug my own project, my goal with this book is to show to the mom that there are, and in this book there are all types of children. Let me just get my copy. I have a table of contents in my copy that I use for proofreading and editing, and I went down and I wrote down the letter of the child that each mom has. And in this book there are 20 moms representing 20 different children, and they are gay, lesbian, transgender, gay, lesbian, transgender, gay and bisexual, and transgender. One mom has all three. Transgender, lesbian, transgender, gay, lesbian, and now identifies as transgender, lesbian, gay, and another lesbian who now identifies as transgender. So there are at least 30% of the women in my Mama Dragon Story Project book who are mothers of transgender children. And their essays speak to pain. And their essays talk about confusion and difficulty in accepting this new role that their child will inhabit moving forward. And how do we reconcile this within a gospel paradigm? Really, truly, honestly, I made this book to be a resource manual for mothers and for parents and for leaders. And I've challenged the Mama Dragons to buy 2 copies of the book, one for themselves to keep at home, to share with their immediate friends and acquaintances, and a second copy that they can give to their bishop. The bishop needs something that they can give to these parents that will give them some examples of different women that have navigated this successfully. Again, not to disparage or to speak ill of anybody, but the LDS Church does have the Mormons and Gays website, mormonsandgays.org. It does not speak to transgender at all. It does not speak to intersex at all. So even though the church has come out with a website that does have some good material on it, they have not addressed the transgender or the intersex situation at all, which makes me want to go back to February 13th of 2015, where Elder Oaks said, this is something that we have not so much experience with, and we have some unfinished business in teaching on that. So it's been over a year since he has said that, and we have yet to hear from our LDS church leaders in any way, shape, or form with ways that ecclesiastical leaders can reach out and offer counseling and guidance to the member who might be identifying as transgender or to their parents or allies.
Yes, agreed. Okay, well, we've been at this for a long time, and there's so many more things that we could talk about, and I'll probably have different guests on to address. I mean, even things like, if you're a parent of a child who is transgender, what are some ways that you can get help and support or move along in that regard? There's just so many different aspects of this that we would never be able to cover in one podcast. But I think that this has been a wonderful, informational, great starting point, very detailed information that you've shared with us, especially around intersex issues. And I would just like to give you the opportunity to close off with anything that you hoped you would have covered tonight, or that you want to make sure people are aware of that maybe I haven't asked you about.
Well, one of the things that I didn't mention really is that if you're the mother or the father of a transgender child and you have nowhere that you've found to reach out to the Mama Dragons and get tied in with their network, because there is a specific transgender group for mothers of transgender children. They're called the T-Mamas. And these T-Mamas are very, very educated. They're educated medically, they're educated legally, they're educated with the practical day-to-day experience of both a male to female and a female to male transgender child. The T-Mamas, quite frankly, within the LDS box, is probably the best resource that the new parent is going to come across in educating themselves both about their child and about how to navigate this religious pickle that we find ourselves in. It's disheartening and it's comforting at the same time, which is amazingly odd to say that the official word from the church is both encouraging and disheartening equally at the same time. Reaching out to the Mama Dragons, and since I'm neck deep with them and I love them and I've been working with them for over a year, of course that's where I want to funnel people to. But I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't see anyone doing this better than the T-Mamas or the Mama Dragons. I really honestly don't. They have a healthy attitude about the transgender individual, and they also have a healthy respect for the level of Mormon belief that you currently have. I think that it's important to understand that the Mama Dragon will accept you and meet you where you are at, regardless of your point of belief or non-belief in Mormonism. This is a scary, scary, scary thing, and it is a road that is dark and dimly lit and curvy and rocky and windy and rainy all at the same time. And if you are that parent who is struggling with how to proceed, please, please reach out. If you are that ecclesiastical leader who has no idea what to do next, please reach out. Please use Family Acceptance Project. Please reach out to myself or to other Mama Dragons. Look up the Mama Dragon Story Project book. Google it and you'll find where it's being sold. If you are the individual themselves who is struggling, please reach out to Trevor. Please reach out to the transgender suicide hotline. It's called translifeline.org, and they have they have a Canadian number and a U.S. number, and it's 877-565-8860 is the U.S. toll-free number. Reach out to them and speak with the individual that knows you and knows your struggle and your pain and your confusion intimately, but has not met you yet. Reach out to those people that understand your situation. I'm just sitting here with wet eyes and a shake in my voice and my head shaking back and forth with compassion and empathy towards anyone that finds themselves on any part of this, whether as the individual who's considers themselves transgender or finds themselves as intersex, their parent or ally or ecclesiastical leader. It is a difficult thing to work through on any level of this.
Well, I so appreciate your time and willingness to come on the show and share so much of your own personal experience, and I just think so much information that can be useful to so many. I have a lot of respect for you. I know you've been through many things in your own life that have led you to this type of knowledge, and I just can't thank you enough for your vulnerability and your willingness to be with us today.
Thank you, Natasha. That means a lot. I appreciate it.
took the long road home, turned minutes into miles. And as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
It's been a long road here, a trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go, all wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary, it's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.